Imagine a world where empires rise from the shadows of forests and hills, where the clash of stone and ambition shapes the destiny of nations. This is the story of Rome, beginning not with conquest, but with the whisper of a king. The first kings of Rome were not warriors, but visionaries. They built walls, not to defend, but to shape the future of a people who would one day rule the world. As the city expanded, so did its hunger for more. The kings could not satisfy the people's ambitions, and the seeds of revolution were sown in the hearts of the Roman elite. In the end, Rome chose not to be ruled by a single man, but by a system. The Republic was born from the ashes of kingship, and from that moment, the world would never be the same. So what exactly are we talking about? We're looking at the very beginning of Rome, a city that started as a small settlement on the Tiber River. It was not just a city, but a kingdom, ruled by kings who shaped the destiny of a people. These kings were not just rulers, they were the foundation of Rome's early identity. They built roads, temples, and the first sense of unity among the Latin tribes. But their power was not absolute, and their legacy would soon shift. The transition from kings to a republic was not a sudden shift, but a slow evolution. It was driven by the people, by the Senate, and by the need for a system that could adapt to Rome's growing ambitions. This was not just a change in leadership, but a change in the very nature of power. The people now had a voice, and Rome was on the cusp of becoming something far greater than a single ruler could control. So we're not just talking about a city, but about the birth of a civilization. We're tracing the first steps of a nation that would one day rule an own world, starting with a kingdom and moving toward a republic. The story of Rome isn't just about empires and conquests. It's about the birth of a system that shaped the modern world. Every time you read a law, vote in a democracy, or sign a contract, you're living in the shadow of Rome's first great experiment in governance. Rome's transition from kings to republic wasn't just a political shift. It was a revolution in how people could shape their own destiny. It showed that power didn't have to be concentrated in one person, and that institutions could outlive individuals. Understanding Rome's early years helps you see how fragile and revolutionary the concept of democracy really is. It wasn't handed down from the stars. It was built, debated, and nearly collapsed more than once. Rome's journey from monarchy to republic is a mirror for today's struggles with power, representation, and the balance between freedom and order. It's not just history. It's a lesson in the endurance of human ambition. So, even if you don't think you care about ancient Rome, you're still living in its legacy. The way we govern, the way we think about justice, and the way we balance power, all of it started in the shadows of a city that once ruled the world. The Roman kingdom was a world of kings, priests, and warriors. Rome's first ruler, Romulus, founded the city on the Palatine Hill, a place steeped in myth and blood. His reign marked the beginning of a civilization that would shape the world. The kings of Rome ruled with divine authority, but their power was challenged by the growing influence of the Senate and the plebeians. The struggle between the patricians and the common people laid the foundation for political change. In 509 BCE, the last Roman king was overthrown, and the Republic was born. Power shifted from kings to elected magistrates, and the Senate became the heart of governance. The Republic expanded through war and diplomacy, from the Italian peninsula to the shores of Greece and beyond. Yet, with expansion came corruption, factionalism, and the seeds of civil strife. The transition from kingdom to republic was not just a political shift, but a transformation of identity. Rome was no longer a city-state. It was a rising empire, destined for greatness and tragedy. Imagine a hill, not too high, but strong. A few people lived there, building a home. That's where Rome began, like a seed in the earth. They had a king, like a big brother who made the rules. He led them, but he was also their leader, and they followed him with care. They made a new system, like a team where everyone had a role. Some made laws, some led, some fought. It was a balance, like a seesaw. So Rome grew not just by force, but by ideas. A small hill became a great city, because they believed in sharing power and building together. The first step in Rome's transformation was the establishment of its legendary monarchy, ruled by the kings of the Tarquins. These rulers held absolute power, from military command to religious ceremonies, shaping Rome's early identity as a city of order and ambition. The monarchy was more than just a rule. It was a sacred institution, with the king seen as both a political leader and a divine intermediary. His authority was reinforced by the Senate, a body of aristocrats who advised and, later, checked his power. But the king's rule was not without limits. The people, especially the plebeians, began to demand greater representation. This tension between the monarchy and the emerging classes would set the stage for the Republic's birth. The foundation of Rome's political structure was built on a delicate balance of power between the king, the Senate, and the people. This balance, though fragile, would one day evolve into the Republic's system of governance. The Roman Republic was not just a government, but a system of checks and balances. At its core was the Senate, a body of wealthy patricians who shaped policy and guided the state. Yet, their power was not absolute, for the people had their own voice through the assemblies. The assemblies, composed of citizens, could pass laws and elect officials, including the consuls who held executive power. These two leaders, elected annually, were responsible for commanding the army and overseeing day-to-day governance. Their authority was checked by the Senate and the people alike. The system was designed to prevent the concentration of power, ensuring that no single individual could dominate the state. This balance between the Senate, the people, and the consuls was the foundation of Roman political stability for centuries. But this system was not without its flaws. The power of the Senate often overshadowed the voices of the people, and the election of consuls could be influenced by wealth and influence rather than merit. These tensions would eventually shape the Republic's evolution. The Roman Republic was a delicate mechanism, finely tuned by the wisdom of its founders. It allowed for the participation of the people, while preserving the stability of the state. This balance was both its strength and its vulnerability. The Republic's strength lay not just in its laws, but in its people. The Senate, though powerful, was not the only voice in Rome. The plebeians, the common citizens, had their own assemblies and tribunes, who acted as their advocates in the Senate. This system of checks and balances was a radical departure from monarchy. It created a fragile democracy, one that could be manipulated, but also one that allowed for the rise of new leaders and ideas. The Republic's greatest innovation was its ability to adapt. When the kings became too strong, they were replaced. When the plebeians demanded more power, they were given it. Temporarily, but with real influence. Yet, the Republic's structure was not without tension. The patricians held power over land and wealth, while plebeians struggled for representation. This struggle would shape the very soul of Rome for centuries to come. This political experiment, this balancing act of power and people, was Rome's greatest stroke of genius. It allowed the city to grow, to expand, and to survive the challenges of its own ambition. The Republic was not perfect, but it was a model of resilience and adaptation. It gave Rome the tools to outlast its kings, and to build an empire that would last for centuries. Beneath the surface of Rome's rise, a quiet revolution was unfolding, one driven not by swords, but by the pulse of the earth itself. The Romans harnessed the power of water, not just to quench thirst, but to shape the very foundations of their civilization. Their mastery of engineering was not just practical. It was a form of control over nature, a way to assert order over chaos. The science of Rome was not limited to stone and water. It extended to the very air they breathed, the soil they farmed, and the laws they wrote. This was the invisible engine of Rome's empire, a network of knowledge, precision, and endurance that kept the city's heart beating. Imagine a city built on the bones of a lion, strong, proud, and fiercely independent. Rome was like that, a kingdom that roared through the ages, then shed its skin to become something new. The king was the lion, the Senate was the jungle. Old, wise, and full of grudges. The people were the prey, but they were also the hunters, waiting for the right moment to take the throne. When the lion died, the jungle didn't vanish. It adapted, it changed, and it learned to walk on two legs. The Republic was born from the old world, not a new one. This isn't a metaphor. It's a mirror. Rome's transition from king to republic was a transformation, not an overthrow. A shedding of skin, not a tearing of it. History isn't just about battles and dates. It's about the choices we make when we outgrow the world we were born into, and how we choose to step into the future. Comment this emoji if you made it to the end. In the heart of a city that once dreamed of empire, a quiet revolution was taking place. It wasn't in the streets, but in the minds of its people. Ideas were shaping a future that would outlive the rulers who dared to imagine it. The Republic wasn't just growing in size, it was growing in thought. New systems of law, new ways of governing, and new frontiers of human potential were being tested in every corner of its expanding borders. But beneath the grandeur of this age, there was an undercurrent of unease. The very success that defined this era also raised questions that would echo through history. What did it mean to be free? And who gets to decide the future? This is the story of a civilization that dared to dream beyond its borders, and the price it paid for reaching for the stars. It's a tale of ambition, innovation, and the weight of legacy, a golden age that shaped the world we know today. So what exactly are we talking about? The Republic's golden age was a time of immense growth, both in power and in ideas. It wasn't just about expanding borders. It was about shaping the future of a nation. This period saw Rome grow from a city-state to a vast empire, stretching across the Mediterranean and beyond. But it wasn't just conquest. It was also about innovation in law, governance, and culture. The Golden Age was marked by a balance between military strength and intellectual progress. Thinkers, engineers, and statesmen worked together to build a society that could endure and thrive. It was a time when Rome wasn't just expanding its territory, but also expanding its vision of what a civilization could be. This was the foundation for the world we know today. You might not think about ancient Rome, but the ideas they built, democracy, law, public spaces, are still shaping your world today. The way we debate, govern, and even design our cities has roots in their innovations. The Romans didn't just build roads. They built a system that connected people, ideas, and cultures. That same spirit of connection is what keeps our global society moving forward. Even the way we think about citizenship and rights began with them. You might not be a senator, but the principles they laid down are still fighting for your voice in the system. This isn't just history. It's a mirror. Looking back at their rise and fall helps us understand the delicate balance between progress and power, and how it affects us now. So, when you think about the world you live in, remember, you're standing on the shoulders of a civilization that once reached for the stars, and built something that still shines today. We begin in 431 BCE, when Athens, at the height of its power, launched the Peloponnesian War against Sparta. This was not just a clash of armies, but a struggle for the soul of the Greek world. The war dragged on for nearly 27 years, testing the limits of Athenian democracy and the ideals of the polis. It exposed both the strength and the fragility of the Republic's vision. Despite the war's toll, Athens continued to innovate. Pushing the boundaries of philosophy, drama, and art, the city became a beacon of human potential, even in the shadow of conflict. The Republic's golden age was not just about conquest or glory. It was about the courage to imagine a better world, even when the cost was high. It was an era of both triumph and tragedy. This era reminds us that great civilizations are not built in a day, but are forged through struggle, innovation, and the unyielding pursuit of progress, even in the face of uncertainty. The core idea is that the Republic grew strong by making smart choices and working together. When people trust each other and share goals, they can build amazing things. They built roads, laws, and new ways to make life better. It wasn't just about getting bigger. It was about getting smarter and fairer for everyone. They believed that if you give people chances and tools, they'll surprise you with what they can create. That's how the Republic became strong and full of life. So the core idea is simple. Work together, be curious, and never stop learning. That's how you build a better world, one step at a time. To understand how this golden age began, we must first look at the foundation. The Roman Republic was built on a delicate balance of power between the Senate, the people, and the military. It was not a monarchy nor a democracy, but a system designed to endure. At its heart was the concept of the res publica, the public affair, which meant that the state belonged to all citizens. This principle gave the Republic its name and its purpose, to serve the people through a system of checks and balances. This dual structure allowed for both stability and innovation. The Senate could plan for the future, while the people could respond to immediate needs. It was a system of compromise, and that compromise was its strength. But this system was not without its flaws. The balance of power was fragile, and over time, the ambitions of individuals and factions would test the very foundations of the Republic. Still, for a time it worked, and that time was its golden age. At the core of this system is a delicate balance between power and responsibility. The Senate, as the legislative heart, debates and enacts laws that shape the future of the Republic. Each law passed must pass through rigorous review and approval, ensuring that it aligns with the principles of justice and the needs of the people. Beneath this structure, the people have a voice through the assembly, where they can propose new ideas and hold leaders accountable. This interplay of power, law, and public will forms the engine of the Republic's golden age, a system that thrives on order, wisdom, and the will of the people. The clever twist lay in the fusion of military might with economic strategy. By using war as a means to expand their empire, the Romans also built a powerful infrastructure that fueled their growing wealth. They would conquer a region, then invest in its roads, ports, and cities, ensuring that the region's resources could be efficiently extracted and transported back to Rome. The empire became a vast network of interconnected regions, each contributing to the whole. This system not only strengthened Rome, but also made it a beacon of innovation and stability. The clever twist was not just in how they expanded, but in how they made expansion sustainable. They transformed war into progress, and conquest into civilization. Beneath the grandeur of Rome's expansion, a quiet revolution was taking place. In the workshops and lecture halls, the ancient world's first scientific minds were laying the groundwork for what we now call the Enlightenment. They studied the movement of the stars, the flow of rivers, and the nature of the human body, seeking not just to understand the world, but to master it through reason and observation. Their work was not just about discovery. It was about power, the ability to predict the tides, build aqueducts, and heal the sick, gave Rome a competitive edge in both war and peace. These early scientists were not just thinkers. They were architects of empire. Their knowledge was both a tool and a weapon, shaping the future of civilization with every theorem and experiment. The Republic's golden age was not just about conquest or politics. It was about the steady, unrelenting pursuit of truth. And in that pursuit, the seeds of modern science were sown. Think of the Roman Republic like a well-oiled machine. Its gears of law, military, and commerce spinning in perfect harmony. It wasn't perfect, but it worked until the weight of its own success began to slow its motion. The machine expanded, not by force alone, but by the cleverness of its design, roads, law, and a system of checks that kept it from collapsing under its own ambition. But as it grew, the machine began to show signs of strain. The more it expanded, the more it needed to keep moving, lest it fall apart. In its final days, the Republic was not just a system of governance. It was a living thing, breathing, struggling, and ultimately collapsing under the weight of its own success. And so, the machine of the Republic, though glorious in its design, was also, in its own way, a gloriously dumb but accurate analogy for the rise and fall of any great civilization. Comment this emoji if you made it to the end. Two great powers, separated by the sea, yet locked in a battle that would shape the ancient world. One, a rising empire of concrete and ambition, the other, a maritime colossus of spice and steel. For over a century, they traded blows, not with swords, but with fire, steel, and the will to dominate the Western Mediterranean. Each victory was a step closer to annihilation. The stage was set, the stakes were high, and the world watched as two empires clashed, not just for land, but for the soul of the ancient world. This is the story of the Punic Wars, a saga of fire, fury, and the unrelenting will of two great civilizations. The Punic Wars were not just battles, they were a war of civilizations. Carthage, a mighty Phoenician city-state, rose from the Mediterranean Sea like a titan of trade and power. Rome, a rising power on the Italian peninsula, saw in Carthage a threat to its ambitions. Carthage had built an empire across the Western Mediterranean, from the Iberian Peninsula to North Africa. Its navy was feared, its wealth vast, and its influence deep. Rome, by contrast, was a city of new beginnings, a republic in the making, hungry for expansion. The war began with a single phrase: "If I could have Carthage, I would have it." This was the challenge hurled by the Roman general, and it set the stage for a conflict that would last over a century and shape the course of history. These wars were not just about land or gold. They were about survival. Carthage had a right to exist, and Rome had a right to expand. The clash between these two cities was not just political, it was existential. The Punic Wars would test the endurance of both nations, their leaders, and their people. It would be a war of attrition, of fire, of steel, and of unrelenting ambition. The stage was set for a final reckoning. The Punic Wars are not just a clash of empires, but a mirror to our own modern world. They show how ambition, power, and survival can shape the course of history. Every battle, every treaty, every loss and victory was a step in a long, brutal journey. It's a story of how the past is never truly gone. It echoes in our politics, our trade, and our ambitions. These wars taught us that power is not just about strength, but about strategy, deception, and the willingness to endure. They are a lesson in how civilizations rise and fall. To understand the Punic Wars is to understand the roots of our global conflicts. It's not just history. It's a warning and a guide for the future. You may not care about Carthage, but you care about the power struggles that shaped the world you live in. That's why you should secretly care about this. The First Punic War erupted in 264 BCE, when a dispute over the island of Sicily ignited a firestorm between Rome and Carthage. Both powers saw the island as a gateway to the Western Mediterranean, and neither was willing to let the other dominate. Rome, though a republic, was a military machine built for expansion. Carthage, a mercantile empire, was a master of naval warfare and trade. Their conflict was not just for land, but for control of the sea itself. The war dragged on for over 20 years, with neither side able to secure a decisive victory. The Romans learned to build warships, and Carthage, though losing ground, fought on with unyielding resolve. In 241 BCE, the Romans finally won a major naval battle, securing Sicily and ending the First War. But the fight was far from over. Carthage would rise again, and the world would feel the weight of their clash. The Punic Wars were not just battles of arms, but of ideologies. Rome sought to conquer, while Carthage sought to trade. And in their clash, the fate of the Western world would be decided. Imagine two giants, Rome and Carthage, locked in a fight for control of the world. One is a rising power, the other a seasoned sea dog. They don't just fight with swords, they fight with ships, trade, and dreams. It's not just about land or gold. It's about who gets to decide the rules of the world. Rome wants to be the boss. Carthage wants to be the boss too. So they fight, again and again. A war is like a game of chess, but with swords and ships. Every move is calculated, every loss is costly. But Rome keeps coming back, stronger each time, ready to take what Carthage has. Carthage is a strong city, but Rome is bigger, bolder, and never gives up. Even when Carthage wins a battle, Rome gets back up, and the fight goes on and on. In the end, Rome wins, but the cost is high. Carthage is destroyed, and Rome is forever changed. The world is no longer the same, and the memory of this war lives on in history. The stage was set in the Western Mediterranean, where two great powers, Rome and Carthage, stood on opposite sides of a widening chasm. Their ambitions clashed like thunderheads over the sea, and their destinies were bound by the fate of the entire region. Carthage, a formidable maritime empire, thrived on its naval dominance and trade routes. Its wealth and strategic location made it a threat to Rome's growing influence in the region. The rivalry between these two cities was not just about land or sea, but about control over the lifelines of the ancient world: trade, power, and influence. The tension simmered for years, until the first sparks of war ignited the region. The stage was ready, and the actors had their roles. The Punic Wars were about to begin. The war's second phase was not just about conquest, but about control. Rome shifted from open battles to strategic sieges, targeting Carthage's vital resources and trade routes, severing its lifeline to the world. The Romans built massive earthworks and rammed their ships into Carthaginian ports, cutting off supply lines and starving the city into submission. This was the true art of siege warfare. Carthage, once a mighty trading empire, now faced the wrath of Rome's relentless strategy. Its wealth and influence were drained, its people exhausted, and its walls weakened by siege and betrayal. Rome's engineers and tacticians had mastered the art of turning siege into strategy, and Carthage's decline was no longer a matter of chance, but of calculated design. The final phase was the most brutal. Rome had outmaneuvered, outlasted, and outwitted Carthage. Now it was time to bring the city to its knees. The turning point came not with a final battle, but with a single devastating act of treachery. A Carthaginian general, disillusioned by the war's endless cost, turned his sword against his own people. He led a surprise attack on Carthage itself, sowing chaos in the heart of the enemy city. Rome, sensing this weakness, seized the opportunity to strike. This betrayal shattered Carthage's will to resist. The Romans, now masters of both land and sea, moved with the precision of a predator closing in on its prey. The final blow was not a battle, but a siege. The Romans starved the city into submission, reducing its great empire to a shadow of its former self. Carthage fell, and with it, the last great power standing against Rome. The war was over, but the empire it left behind would shape the world for centuries to come. Beneath the clash of swords and the roar of war, the science of war was already being forged. Rome and Carthage were not just waging battles, they were waging a war of engineering and logistics. The Carthaginian navy, built with ironclad triremes and bronze ramming horns, was a marvel of early metallurgy and naval design. It was a floating fortress, designed to dominate the sea. Rome's engineers devised massive siege engines, including the infamous torsion-based ballistae and onagers, capable of hurling stones and fire across enemy fortifications. Carthage, in turn, mastered the art of urban warfare and naval blockades, using fire and disease as weapons, turning the very environment into a battlefield. In the end, it wasn't just swords that decided the outcome of these wars. It was the relentless pursuit of scientific and technological superiority, the very foundation of empire. Imagine two titanic beasts, locked in a battle for dominion over the known world. One is a lion, sleek and powerful, with an empire built on conquest. The other is a serpent, cunning and resilient, with a legacy of trade and might. The lion strikes first, swift and decisive. But the serpent is always one step ahead, slipping away through the cracks in the lion's armor. Each clash leaves both sides battered, but neither willing to yield. The lion's victories are glorious, but they come at a cost. The serpent, though wounded, thrives in the shadows, waiting for the moment to strike back with greater fury. This is not just a battle of strength, but of endurance. In the end, the lion may win, but the serpent's legacy lingers in the bones of the world it helped shape. Both are titans, and their story is one of war, ambition, and the endless hunger for power. Comment this emoji if you made it to the end. In the year 44 BCE, a young man named Gaius Octavius stood on the steps of the Forum, watching the Senate debate the fate of a man who would change the world. The air was thick with tension, the voices of senators rising and falling like the tides. The man who had just been assassinated was a figure of immense power and controversy. His death was not just a political act, but a moment that would set the course of Rome for centuries to come. The boy who watched it all was not yet the leader of an empire, but he was already at the center of a storm. His family name, his father's legacy, and his own unshakable will would soon shape the fate of Rome. History is often written by the victors, but sometimes it is shaped by those who are left behind. Those who watch, wait, and finally act. What began as a moment of tragedy would end as the birth of a new Rome. One built not on chaos, but on the quiet, calculated will of a single man. So what exactly are we talking about? The term Principate might sound like a fancy word, but it refers to the political system Augustus established. It wasn't a monarchy, but it wasn't a republic either. It was a new kind of rule, one that would shape the Roman Empire for centuries. Augustus didn't just seize power. He redefined it. He positioned himself as a restorer of the republic, not a usurper. This allowed him to wield immense authority while maintaining the illusion of traditional Roman governance. The Principate was a compromise between the chaos of the late Republic and the rigidity of a monarchy. It was a new kind of rule, one that blended tradition with innovation, and would become the foundation of the Roman Empire. This is the moment when Rome stopped being a republic and became an empire. The transition wasn't sudden, but it was decisive. It set the stage for everything that followed: the Pax Romana, the expansion, and the legacy of Rome itself. Augustus didn't just change Rome. He changed the world. His reign marked the end of chaos and the beginning of an empire that would shape history for centuries. The peace he brought, the Pax Romana, allowed ideas, art, and law to flow across continents. It was a quiet revolution, not of swords, but of systems and stability. So when you think about Rome, don't just imagine marble and emperors. Think about the foundations of the modern world, built by a man who knew how to end a war and start a civilization. Understanding Augustus isn't just about history. It's about seeing how the past continues to shape the present. The world we live in owes its order, its scale, and its reach to a single man's vision. You may not care about emperors or ancient Rome, but you are living in the world they created. That's why you should secretly care, because their story is still yours. The chaos of the Republic had reached its breaking point. Civil wars, political assassination, and the collapse of order had left Rome in ruins. Augustus emerged not as a king, but as a savior, a man who understood the weight of power and the cost of stability. He took the title of Augustus, not to claim divinity, but to signal a new era. He restructured the military, reformed the Senate, and established a system of governments that would last for centuries. The Principate was born from necessity, not ambition. So, imagine a world where one person decides to be the boss of everything. That person is Augustus. He didn't just take over. He built a whole new way of being a leader, like a new game with new rules. Before Augustus, Rome was like a big, wild party where everyone had their own rules. But Augustus said, let's make a plan. Let's have one leader who takes care of everyone, but not too much power. He didn't call himself emperor. He called himself first citizen. It was a way to say, I'm not a king, I'm just the best person to lead. But the people knew what it meant. Augustus' idea wasn't just about power. It was about building something that would last. A new way of being a leader. A new way of being a country. And it changed everything. The first step in securing the Principate was the consolidation of military power. Augustus built a network of loyal legions and provincial governors, ensuring no force could challenge his authority from within the empire. He appointed his trusted allies to key positions, shaping a political structure that would allow him to rule while maintaining the illusion of the Republic's institutions. Augustus also reformed the army, ensuring that its loyalty was tied to his personal charisma and the new order he had imposed on Rome. With control over the military, the Senate, and the provinces, he set the stage for a new kind of rule, one that would blend authority with the veneer of tradition. This was the foundation of the Principate, a carefully constructed balance of power, where Augustus held the reins but allowed the Senate and the people to believe they were still in charge. Once the Principate was established, the system required a clear structure. Augustus created a framework where power was both centralized and carefully balanced, ensuring stability while maintaining the illusion of the Republic's traditions. At the core of this mechanism was the Senate, now a body more ceremonial than legislative. It served as a symbol of continuity, a reminder that Rome's soul remained intact beneath the new order. The military, too, was restructured. Augustus maintained control through his legions, placing loyal officers in key positions, ensuring that Rome's defense remained in his hands and not in the hands of rival generals. Economic policy was another crucial element. Augustus initiated public works, rebuilt cities, and invested in infrastructure, all to create a sense of renewal and to secure the loyalty of the Roman people. Finally, the system was upheld by a network of officials, from local magistrates to provincial governors, all answerable to Augustus. This created a layered hierarchy, ensuring that no power could rise unchecked. Augustus' genius lay not just in power, but in the art of appearance. He made himself seem a savior, a bringer of peace, rather than a conqueror. The world saw a new order, not a new master. He didn't rule as a king, but as a first citizen, a title that blurred the line between leadership and the people. This was a calculated move, designed to avoid the taint of tyranny. The system was designed to be stable, to endure beyond any single man. Augustus built institutions that outlived him, ensuring his legacy would not be erased by time or rebellion. This was the clever twist, using the machinery of the Republic to create a new form of government. It was not a return to the past, but a reimagining of it, tailored to serve a new ruler with ancient forms. In this way, Augustus not only seized power, but he redefined what it meant to rule. He created a system that would last for centuries, a blend of monarchy, republic, and statecraft. Beneath the grandeur of Rome's new order, a subtle science of control was at work. Augustus didn't merely rule. He engineered stability through a careful balance of power, law, and public perception. The Principate was not a monarchy, nor a republic. Its structure was a delicate calculus of authority, where the Senate and the people were both kept in check and appeased. Augustus understood that governance was not just about law, but about the rhythms of daily life, how people moved, worked, and believed. He embedded his vision into the very fabric of Roman society. The state's control over the calendar, the roads, the military, and even the calendar of festivals was a form of subtle dominance. Every event was a message, every law a tool. In the end, the Principate was a system of invisible forces, of memory, of habit, of expectation. Augustus did not rule by force, but by the quiet certainty that his order was the only possible one. Augustus did not create a new system, but re-engineered the old one with precision, like a master carpenter refitting a rotten frame into something that looks like a new house. He took the bones of Rome, stripped away the rot, and built a new structure with the same materials, just rearranged to serve a different purpose. The Principate wasn't a new foundation, but a reinforced base, hiding the cracks with mortar and plaster, so the people would never know it was built on borrowed time. It was a system that could last, not because it was perfect, but because it was too clever to be undone, until the weight of time made it impossible to hold. In the end, Augustus built not a kingdom, but a machine, one that could outlast its creator, and eventually itself. Comment this emoji if you made it to the end. It wasn't peace exactly. It was an empire at its peak, stretching from Britain to Egypt, stitching together civilizations with roads, law, and language. But it felt like peace, in a way no one had seen before. For over 2 centuries, the Pax Romana brought stability, not just to Rome, but to the people living under its rule. Jews, Greeks, Britons, and countless others. It wasn't just the absence of war, it was the presence of order. The empire didn't just control the land. It controlled the flow of ideas, culture, and innovation. It was a machine of ambition, but for a moment, it seemed to be working for everyone. But this wasn't a utopia. It was an empire. And empires are built on power, and power is never without cost. Still, for a time, the world seemed to breathe in harmony. So what happened to this golden age? And why does it still feel like a distant dream today? That's what we're gonna find out. So what exactly are we talking about? The Pax Romana wasn't just a name. It was an era when Rome brought stability, security, and order to the vast lands it controlled. It wasn't a time of complete peace, but it was a period of relative stability, where emperors like Augustus worked to unify the empire under one rule. The Pax Romana allowed for the free movement of people, goods, and ideas across the empire, linking distant cultures and fostering a shared Roman identity. It was a time when the Mediterranean became a single, interconnected world, where trade flourished and cities like Alexandria and Ephesus thrived. But this peace was fragile, built on military strength and political control, and it eventually gave way to the challenges of governing such a vast and diverse empire. The Pax Romana wasn't just about peace. It was about the creation of a shared human experience, one that shaped the way we think about connection, governance, and identity today. By bringing together cultures, languages, and ideas across 3 continents, the Romans laid a foundation for the globalized world we live in now, without ever having a word for it. The Pax Romana began with Augustus' victory at Actium, ending the civil wars that had torn Rome apart. A fragile peace was forged, not through conquest, but through diplomacy and the promise of stability. The empire expanded rapidly, but the focus shifted from war to administration. Roads were built, laws were codified, and the Roman legal system spread like a shadow across the provinces. The empire reached its peak under Trajan, a ruler who built monuments to his achievements and expanded Rome's borders to their furthest limits. Yet, even then, the cracks were beginning to show. As the years passed, the cost of maintaining such a vast empire grew. The legions were stretched thin, and the provinces began to chafe under the weight of Roman rule. The peace was never permanent. The Pax Romana was a golden age, but it was also a fragile illusion. It lasted over 2 centuries, but even the strongest empires cannot defy the tide of time and change. So imagine this. The whole world is one big neighborhood, and for 200 years, everyone agrees to be friends. No fighting, no stealing, and everyone gets to share the same playground. It's not magic or luck. It's rules everyone follows. Like a big team playing together. No cheating. Just helping each other out. Even though the world is huge, everyone feels connected. Like they're all part of the same story, and that story is about peace and sharing. It's like a big calm day where everyone knows they can trust each other, and that makes life better for everyone. The Pax Romana began not with peace, but with power. Augustus, the first Roman emperor, consolidated control over a vast and fractured empire, bringing order to the chaos of Rome's past. He restructured the military, placed trusted governors in key regions, and established a centralized bureaucracy that extended Roman law and customs across the provinces. Trade routes were secured, roads were built, and the legal system was standardized, creating a framework where commerce, culture, and communication could flourish. This was not just about control. It was about creating the conditions for a shared Roman identity, one that spanned from the Atlantic to the east and from the Sahara to the Danube. The Pax Romana was a carefully constructed system, a balance of power, law, and ideology that allowed the Roman world to thrive, until the weight of its own success began to strain the empire. At the heart of the stability was the network of roads and highways that connected the farthest reaches of the empire. These were not just paths, but arteries of communication and control. Each road was maintained by the state, with soldiers and laborers working in unison to keep the infrastructure in order. This ensured that messages, goods, and armies could move swiftly and safely. The legal system was another pillar of this order. The same laws were applied across all provinces, and justice was administered through a network of magistrates and judges. This legal uniformity gave people a sense of security and predictability. No matter where they lived, they knew their rights and obligations under the law. And finally, the presence of the legions ensured that this system was not just maintained, but enforced. They were the visible hand of the state, ready to suppress rebellion and protect order. At the heart of the Pax Romana was not just military power, but a system of law and administration so efficient, it could enforce order across the entire empire with minimal direct control. The empire's vast network of roads and couriers allowed imperial officials to move swiftly, ensuring that laws were not just written but enforced across thousands of miles. This blend of central authority and local administration meant that while Rome dictated the rules, it allowed regions to maintain a degree of autonomy, a balance that kept the empire from collapsing under its own weight. The Pax Romana wasn't just about peace. It was about control through design. A system that made the vastness of the empire feel manageable, predictable, and secure. Beneath the marble and the marble columns, the Pax Romana was powered by a quiet, unyielding force, engineering. The Romans didn't just build roads. They built a system that moved people, goods, and ideas across continents. They devised aqueducts that carried water from distant mountains, sustaining cities and farms alike. These were not just feats of strength, but of precision, a science of gravity and geometry made manifest in stone. Their legal system, though rooted in tradition, was a marvel of consistency and clarity. Laws were written, codified, and enforced across vast distances, ensuring a shared understanding of justice and order. Even the military was an extension of this scientific mindset. Discipline, logistics, and strategy were not just tactics. They were the foundation of an empire that could sustain peace for centuries. The Pax Romana was not just a dream of peace. It was a meticulously engineered reality. It was a world where science and order shaped the rhythm of daily life, and where the unseen mechanisms of power ensured stability across the known world. Imagine a world where the roads are smooth, the trade is free, and the people move without fear. That's the Pax Romana. Not just an era, but a system that made the world feel smaller, connected, and safer. It's like a giant machine, humming with order, where laws are consistent and communication is swift. The Empire didn't just control territory, it controlled information. It's not perfect, but it's efficient. It allowed Rome to be more than a military power. It became a culture, a language, a way of life that spread across continents. So, in the end, the Pax Romana was more than peace. It was a blueprint for how an empire can be both strong and stable, and how a world can be connected without being controlled. Comment this emoji if you made it to the end. Imagine a world where the streets of a great city hum with the sound of 100 languages, where the air is thick with the scent of parchment and ambition. This was not just a city of stone and emperors, but a crucible where ideas were forged, traded, and transformed into something greater than their origins. Rome was not just a power, it was a paradox. An empire that built its greatness on the very idea of unity, yet thrived on the diversity of its people. To understand Rome is to grasp the essence of human ambition, and to see how it shaped the world we live in today. This is the story of a civilization that did not just rule the world, it reimagined it. So what exactly are we talking about? We're not just discussing emperors and legions. We're exploring a civilization that built roads, law, and language that still shape the modern world. This is a story of ideas, philosophy, rhetoric, and governance that traveled far beyond the borders of Rome itself, influencing the minds of future generations. We're looking at the birth of a global civilization that saw itself as the center of the world. Yet, its influence reached the furthest corners of the known earth. This is not just about conquest, but about the creation of a shared intellectual and cultural language that would outlive the empire itself. To understand Rome is to understand how a single civilization could both dominate and enrich the world through the power of its ideas. You might think ancient Rome is a relic of the past, but its influence is woven into the very fabric of modern life. From legal systems to language, its legacy is alive in every courtroom and contract you've ever signed. Consider how Roman architecture shaped cities from Rome to Washington, D.C. The same principles that raised the Colosseum still guide the design of public spaces today. Rome didn't just build empires. It built the intellectual and cultural frameworks that made the modern world possible. Its ideas still shape how we think, live, and govern. Understanding Rome isn't just about history. It's about seeing how the past continues to shape the present. It's a way of understanding our own world through the lens of a civilization that once ruled the known world. The Roman Republic was a period of political experimentation and civic virtue, where the balance of power between the Senate, magistrates, and the people shaped the foundations of governance that would outlive the Republic itself. As the Republic expanded, so did its ambitions, and with it, the need for new forms of leadership. Julius Caesar's rise exemplifies the tension between power, legitimacy, and the will of the people. Under Augustus, Rome entered a golden age of stability and artistic patronage, where the emperor's power was carefully veiled in the language of restoration and tradition. The Pax Romana brought peace across the known world, but also the challenge of governing vast and diverse territories, which demanded innovation in law, administration, and diplomacy. As the empire reached its height, Rome became a hub of knowledge, where Greek philosophy, Roman law, and the spirit of inquiry flourished in the minds of thinkers and statesmen alike. Imagine a city where every stone holds a story, and every street hums with the voices of thinkers, poets, and engineers. Rome wasn't just a place. It was a living library, a stage for the greatest minds of the ancient world. In Rome, ideas were as important as armies. They built roads that connected the world, but also ideas that connected people across continents and centuries. Rome didn't just rule the world. It shaped how we think about law, art, and knowledge. Its thinkers laid the foundation for everything we know today. Even in its fall, Rome gave us something greater, the legacy of its ideas, which still live in the hearts and minds of people everywhere. The foundation of Rome's power was not just in its armies, but in its ability to absorb and reconfigure the cultures it encountered. This first step was the setup, a city built on the Tiber, strategically located, with access to trade routes and fertile lands. Rome began as a small city-state, but its location at the crossroads of Europe and the Mediterranean gave it an advantage. It was a place where ideas, goods, and people converged, setting the stage for expansion. The Roman Republic was built on a system of checks and balances, with a Senate, elected magistrates, and a citizen militia. The structure allowed for stability and growth, even as Rome expanded. But Rome's success was not purely political. It was also a city of law, order, and organization. Its legal system, public works, and infrastructure created a framework that could sustain and support its vast empire. This setup was more than just geography or governance. It was a cultural and intellectual environment that allowed Rome to flourish, to adapt, and to inspire for centuries to come. The second step in Rome's mechanism is the establishment of a bureaucratic framework that ensures efficiency and continuity. This framework is not merely administrative, but ideological, reinforcing the legitimacy of the state through a structured hierarchy. At the heart of this system is the legal code, laws that are both practical and symbolic. These laws are not just tools of governance, but also a reflection of Roman values, written down and enforced to create a sense of order and justice. The Roman legal system was not only about punishment, but also about protection. It created a framework where citizens could seek redress, which in turn strengthened the social contract and fostered trust in the state. This legal order was supported by a network of magistrates and officials, each with defined roles and responsibilities. This division of power ensured that no single individual could dominate the state, thus preserving stability. In this way, the Roman bureaucracy was both a tool of control and a mechanism of inclusion. It allowed for the integration of diverse peoples and ideas, all while maintaining a central authority that could adapt and endure. The clever twist lies in the way Rome didn't merely conquer territories, but wove them into its own intellectual and cultural fabric. By granting citizenship and legal rights to conquered peoples, Rome transformed them from subjects into participants in its grand narrative. This legal integration was not just a political maneuver. It was a means of securing loyalty and intellectual exchange. The conquered brought their own traditions, philosophies, and knowledge, which enriched Roman thought and governance. Rome's ability to absorb and adapt external ideas was one of its most enduring strengths. It didn't just conquer lands. It absorbed their languages, legal systems, and cultural practices, turning them into the foundation of its own imperial identity. This process of integration was not without tension, but it allowed Rome to maintain a delicate balance between central authority and local autonomy. It was a system that could evolve, adapt, and endure. In this way, Rome's intellectual and cultural flourishing was not the result of dominance alone, but of inclusion, adaptation, and the strategic weaving of diverse traditions into a shared imperial framework. Beneath the grandeur of marble and bronze, Rome's intellectual engine was powered by a relentless pursuit of knowledge. It was not just about conquest, but about understanding the world, its natural laws, its mechanics, and its hidden forces. Rome's engineers were among the first to systematize the study of water, building vast networks that harnessed the power of nature. These were not mere feats of construction, but early applications of scientific reasoning. The Romans were also pioneers in the study of geometry, using it to design roads, buildings, and even the layout of entire cities. Their mastery of perspective and proportion reflected a deep, methodical approach to spatial understanding. In the study of astronomy, they charted the heavens with meticulous care, aligning their temples and calendars with celestial movements. Their observations were not mere superstition, but part of a broader scientific tradition. Even in medicine, Rome's physicians applied empirical methods. cataloging symptoms and treatments with a clarity that would later influence the foundations of modern science. They were not just healers, but thinkers. Rome's scientific legacy was not just in what it built, but in the way it thought, systematically, empirically, and with an enduring curiosity about the world. This was the hum of progress beneath the empire's surface. The empire was a machine, and the mind was its engine. It did not think, it consumed. It did not question, it expanded. Like a steam engine, Rome was powered by coal, by conquest, by labor, by the endless extraction of human and material wealth. The machine did not understand its own workings, but it knew how to make more machines, and to make them faster, stronger, and more efficient. It did not ask why, it only asked how, and in asking how, it built empires, and built them well. In the end, it was not the mind that built Rome, but the will to make it bigger, and the strength to keep it moving. Comment this emoji if you made it to the end. In the quiet corners of power, where decisions shape nations, the seeds of decline are sown in silence. Corruption is not just a crime. It's a slow, insidious decay that seeps into the very fabric of governance. The military, once a symbol of strength, becomes an instrument of control, a force that protects but also subjugates. When the line between defense and domination blurs, the cost is measured in lives, not just in budgets. This video is not about blame. It's about understanding. Understanding how the machinery of power can shift from protector to oppressor, and how the price of silence is paid in blood. We are here to look at the roots of a system in decline, to trace the path from power to corruption, from strength to subjugation, and to ask, with honesty and gravity, where we stand today. So, what exactly are we talking about? It's not just about individual greed or bad policies. It's about a system that has grown numb to accountability, where power is not checked but concentrated, and where truth is often drowned out by noise. We're talking about leaders who promise stability but deliver chaos, who use their positions not to serve the people but to serve themselves and their allies. It's a cycle of broken promises and broken systems. Military overreach is not just about boots on the ground. It's about the use of force without justification, the erosion of civilian control, and the transformation of soldiers from protectors into enforcers of a broken order. When the military is allowed to operate beyond its constitutional bounds, it's not just the army that suffers. It's the nation, the people, and the very idea of justice that is undermined. This is not a theoretical problem. It's real, it's here, and it's growing. We are witnessing the slow decay of a system that was once meant to protect, but now seems to protect only those in power. You might think this is a distant problem, but the seeds of decline are in your daily life. They are in the way your taxes are spent, the promises that are broken, and the institutions that are no longer trusted. Every time you see a public official who seems to care more about power than people, you're seeing the first cracks in the foundation of your democracy. It's not just politics, it's the erosion of the very systems that protect you. You may not feel the weight of it now, but the consequences of political corruption and military overreach are felt in the erosion of trust, in the silence of the voiceless, and in the slow unraveling of justice. The truth is, you are not a spectator in this. You are the reason these systems exist, and you are the one who must decide whether to let them crumble or fight to keep them whole. So, if you're wondering why this matters, ask yourself, what kind of world do you want to live in? One where power is accountable, or one where it's lost to the shadows? The first seeds of decline were sown in the 1980s, when political leaders began to see the military not as a tool of defense, but as a means of control. Corruption bloomed in the shadows, as generals and politicians colluded to divert funds, turning soldiers into enforcers of a regime that no longer served the people. The 1990s saw the rise of a new kind of warfare, one not fought on fields, but in the minds of the people, where misinformation and fear became the weapons of choice. As the years passed, the military grew more powerful, and the government grew more desperate, creating a cycle of violence and deceit that would define an entire generation. By the early 2000s, the line between soldier and state had blurred, and the people who once trusted the military had become prisoners of their own silence. Imagine a tree that's growing too fast. Its roots are tangled, and the branches are reaching too far. It's not growing strong. It's growing weak, and the whole forest feels the weight of it. When leaders promise more than they can give, and soldiers are told to do more than they should, the whole system starts to break. It's not just about power. It's about control. When the military is used not to protect, but to control, it's like a tool that's been twisted. It's not fighting enemies. It's fighting its own people. This isn't just about bad people. It's about a system that's been left to rot. We don't see it all the time, but we feel it in the silence between the shots. It all begins with a system that is not broken, but bent. A framework designed for stability is slowly twisted by those who see power as a means, not a mandate. In the quiet corners of bureaucracy, decisions are made not for the people, but for the interests of a few. The rules are written, but the players are chosen. Money flows into the system like water through a cracked pipe. It lubricates the gears of power, but also corrodes the foundation of trust. The first signs are subtle: small favors, unexplained contracts, and the quiet removal of inconvenient voices. These are the first cracks in the facade of order. The system is not destroyed overnight. It is slowly poisoned. Its integrity eroded by the weight of its own contradictions. And once the first seed is planted, the roots take hold. Once the corruption is embedded, it begins to twist the machinery of governance. Officials, once bound by law, now serve the interests of a few. The system is no longer a framework for service, but a prison for accountability. The military, now drawn into this tangled web, becomes an instrument of control rather than protection. Its loyalty shifts from the nation to the elites who fund its operations. The line between defense and dominance blurs. This process is not sudden. It is a slow decay, like a rot spreading through the roots of a tree. The people may not see it at first, but the weight of corruption and militarism grows heavier with each passing year. The seeds of decline are not planted in a single moment. They are sown through years of unchecked power, broken promises, and the gradual erosion of trust. What follows is not chaos, it is inevitability. The clever twist is not in the actions, but in the perception. The people are told they are choosing, yet they are being guided by unseen hands. The system is designed so that the people feel empowered, but their choices are filtered through layers of manipulation and misinformation. In this way, the people are not deceived in the traditional sense, but they are co-opted. Their consent is not stolen, but it is rendered irrelevant. This is the third step in the process of decline, the moment when the illusion is maintained and the reality is obscured. It is the most insidious form of control. To understand how it works, you must recognize that the most powerful force in the system is not the sword or the gun, but the idea that you are not being controlled. Beneath the chaos, there's a pattern, not of intent, but of consequence. The science of collapse isn't in the lies, but in the loops of power that repeat, generation after generation. Institutions are not machines, but ecosystems. When trust dies, the system can't function. It becomes a house with no windows, and the air grows thin. The data is clear, but the message is ignored. Every failed policy, every broken promise is a data point in a system that refuses to learn. It just keeps repeating. We are not just witnessing decline. We are living in its algorithm. Every decision, every law, every act of violence is a line in the code that writes the future. The science of collapse is not in the destruction, but in the quiet unraveling, the silence between the shots, the pauses between the lies. That's where the real damage happens. Imagine a garden, once lush and vibrant, now choked by weeds and rot. The caretaker, once a gardener, has become a landlord, charging rent for the soil. He promises to tend to the garden, but instead, he builds walls around it, blocking out the sun and the rain. The plants wither, not from lack of water, but from the weight of his decisions. He tells the people the garden is thriving, but they know the truth. The soil is poisoned, the roots are broken, and the only thing growing is the rot in his heart. In the end, the garden is no longer a place of growth. It is a monument to failure, a tomb for the future, and a reminder of what happens when power is mistaken for wisdom. Comment this emoji if you made it to the end. The empire stands at a crossroads, its foundation shaken by forces it can no longer ignore. Inflation creeps in like a shadow, stealing value from the people's pockets and the nation's trust. Trade routes, once the lifeblood of the empire, now face blockages, both by politics and the shifting tides of global power. What was once a reliable flow of goods is now a fragile thread. Inflation is not a number. It is a weight on the shoulders of every citizen, every worker, every dreamer. It turns promise into pain and stability into uncertainty. Trade is not just about goods. It is about trust, about alliances, about the fragile balance of power. When that balance shifts, the empire must choose between survival and collapse. And so we begin not with a grand declaration, but with a question. How long can an empire endure when its own systems begin to fail? Inflation isn't just numbers on a page. It's the rising cost of groceries, the shrinking paychecks, and the quiet fear that your savings won't last. It's a slow, suffocating erosion of everyday life. Trade imbalances aren't just economic jargon. They're the result of over-reliance on imports, the empty shelves in stores, and the growing gap between those who have and those who don't. It's a silent war of supply and demand. The strain on the empire isn't just financial. It's political, social, and psychological. It's the growing dissent in the streets, the loss of faith in institutions, and the creeping sense that the system is failing those who built it. We're not just talking about economics. We're talking about a system under pressure, a people struggling to survive, and a future that feels uncertain. It's a crisis that's not just in the numbers. It's in the lives of the people. You might think inflation is just numbers on a screen, that it's the rising cost of bread, medicine, and your child's school fees. It's not just about money. It's about survival. Trade wars aren't just about tariffs. They're about who gets to sell what and who gets left out. When ports close, jobs vanish, and communities feel the weight of a broken system. The empire struggles aren't abstract. They ripple through your life. When the state can't pay its bills, it cuts services, raises taxes, and turns to control, not solutions. Inflation and trade aren't just economic problems. They're symptoms of a system under stress. And if it breaks for everyone. You don't have to be an economist to feel the strain. The empire's troubles are your troubles, wrapped in numbers and policy, but felt in your daily life. The collapse of the Roman Empire began with cracks in its economic foundation. Inflation surged as the state devalued its currency, and the people lost faith in the promise of stability. The empire's wealth was no longer in its hands, but in the hands of its enemies. Trade routes faltered as the empire's borders became battlegrounds. The flow of goods slowed, and the cost of imports rose. The empire could no longer afford to sustain itself on the backs of its provinces. In the 14th century, the Black Death struck Europe, and the empire's economy reeled from the loss of millions. Labor became scarce, wages rose, and the feudal system began to crumble. The old order could not withstand the weight of its own people. The Industrial Revolution brought new possibilities, but also new strengths. The empire struggled to adapt, to modernize, to compete with rising powers. The old ways of wealth and power were no longer enough to hold the empire together. Today, the echoes of those past struggles still shape our world. The same patterns of inflation, trade imbalance, and economic strain continue to test the limits of modern empires, whether they be nations or global institutions. Imagine your piggy bank is filling up with water. The more water, the heavier it gets, and the harder it is to save for something important. Now, imagine that water is not just filling up, but also making the coins inside feel heavier. You can't tell if it's the coins or the water that's making it hard to save. You try to do the same things you did before, but everything feels more expensive. Like the water is making everything cost more to hold. Even when you try to save, it feels like you're just filling up more water, and the real coins are getting harder to find. So you start to wonder, when will the water stop coming? And can you still save anything at all? The empire begins with a simple truth. Money is a promise. But promises, when stretched too thin, become fragile and hard to believe. This is the first step in the unraveling, the quiet moment when the foundation is no longer solid. At the heart of this is the central bank, a powerful institution that controls the flow of money. But when it prints too much, the value of that promise begins to erode. It's not just about numbers. It's about trust. And trust is the first thing to slip away. Trade is the lifeblood of the empire. But when borders close and tariffs rise, the flow of goods slows. The markets are disrupted and the first cracks in the economy begin to show, in empty warehouses and unmet demand. The empire's reach is vast, but its weaknesses are often hidden in plain sight. The initial steps, the setup, are not dramatic, but they are the start of something far more dangerous. The foundation is shifting, and the world is beginning to feel it. The first step is the creation of money, but it is the second step that sets the wheels truly in motion. Central banks print currency, and then they inject it into the economy through lending. This money does not just disappear. It flows into the hands of banks, which then lend it out to businesses and individuals, expanding the money supply beyond what was originally printed. But this flow is not infinite. If too much money is chasing too few goods, prices begin to rise. The value of the currency diminishes, and the illusion turns into a reality of inflation. The mechanism is simple, yet its consequences are profound. It is not about the creation of wealth, but the dilution of its value, and the gradual erosion of the empire's economic foundation. In the end, it is not the money that fails, but the people who believe in it. The illusion of prosperity is built on a system that, once stretched too far, can no longer hold. The clever twist is not in the numbers, but in the narrative. The empire tells itself a story of strength, masking the cracks with rhetoric and delay. This story is passed down through generations, shaping policies and public perception. It becomes a shield against reality, a way to justify the cost of holding on. It's a delicate balance. Acknowledge the crisis and you risk collapse. Ignore it and you risk losing the people's trust. The empire chooses the third path, neither truth nor surrender. The clever twist is the final act of empire, masking decay with control, deception with order, and hope with delay. It's not just about survival, but about maintaining the illusion of control. Beneath the political theatrics and policy debates, the real engine of the economy is physics, chemistry, and the laws of thermodynamics. Everything we produce, trade, and consume is rooted in the material world, and it is fraying. Inflation isn't just a number on a screen. It's the result of energy costs, supply chains, and the physical limits of what a society can extract and transport. The planet is not infinite, and neither is its capacity to sustain growth. The strain on the empire is not just economic, it's physical. The same resources that fuel our machines and our markets are also the ones that power our survival. We are running out of both. The science is clear, and it's not optimistic. We are extracting more than the earth can give, and we are paying the price in higher costs, greater inequality, and a future that is less stable with every passing year. This is not just about money. This is about the physical reality of our existence. And the choices we make today will shape the world we leave to our children. Imagine a vast, ancient empire, its foundations built on rivers of gold and the toil of its people. But now, the rivers are dry, and the gold is just paper in the hands of the powerful. The merchants, once proud and prosperous, now trade in whispers and borrowed time, their goods more valuable in promise than in reality. The empire's leaders, blind to the suffering below, continue to build monuments to their own glory, even as the foundations of their rule crumble. And so, the empire lives on in its symbols, but dies in the hearts of those it was meant to protect. It is not the empire that fails, but the system that feeds on it. A system that cannot sustain the weight of its own promises. Comment this emoji if you made it to the end. In the year 212, the Roman Empire stretched across 3 continents, yet its heart was already breaking. It was a world of grandeur and decay, where emperors rose and fell like seasons, and the people lived between hope and despair. The empire had endured for centuries, but in the 3rd century, it was as if the gods themselves had turned their backs. Civil wars raged, cities burned, and the very fabric of society was unraveling. In the midst of this chaos, a new emperor was proclaimed. But he was not the one who would save the empire. He was just another name in a long line of rulers who could not hold the world together. The empire was no longer a single entity, but a collection of fractured states, each with its own ruler, its own army, and its own claim to the throne. As the 3rd century wore on, the empire became a graveyard of its own making. But even in its death, it left behind a legacy of resilience, a reminder of what was lost and what could have been. The 3rd century wasn't just a time of war. It was a time of unraveling. Empires that once stood tall now crumbled beneath their own weight, and the people who lived through it felt the world falling apart around them. The Roman Empire, once a beacon of order, became a patchwork of competing rulers, each claiming the title of emperor. Some were assassinated, others betrayed, and a few were simply lost in the chaos of power struggles. In the East, the Sassanid Empire rose as a new power, challenging Rome from the very borders of Persia. The once proud legions were stretched thin, and the line between defense and collapse blurred. Religious conflicts erupted, as different faiths vied for influence. The old gods were no longer worshipped, and new ones rose in their place, but none brought peace to a world in disarray. The people of the 3rd century lived in a world that had lost its direction. Their rulers were no longer protectors, but predators, and their cities, once centers of culture and power, had become symbols of despair. You may think this is a story of distant emperors and forgotten wars, but it's a story of how power can unravel a civilization. When Rome fell into chaos, it was not just a city that crumbled. It was a system that failed to hold the world together. The same systems that built empires, law, trade, religion, became the very tools of their collapse. What was once a network of stability became a web of competing interests, where no one trusted anyone, and no one could be trusted. The empire's collapse wasn't just a political or military event. It was a loss of meaning. People stopped believing in the gods, the emperors, the order of things. They were left with only the raw, unfiltered reality of survival. The chaos of the 3rd century wasn't just about emperors dying or cities burning. It was about the slow, suffocating death of a world that once felt safe. And that's why, in some way, we all still feel the weight of that collapse. This isn't just history. It's a mirror. A reminder of how fragile order is, how quickly trust can erode, and how easily the world can fall apart if we let it. It's a warning, whispered through the dust of time. The year is 167. The Roman Empire is already fractured, its borders bleeding under the weight of invasion and rebellion. The Danubian legions are overwhelmed, and the Parthian horsemen press deeper into the heart of the empire. By 175, the empire has splintered into a patchwork of warlords and pretenders. Aurelian, the last of the restorers, struggles to hold the line as barbarian hordes swarm from every direction. In 192, the empire is in the hands of an emperor who is not even Roman. The Senate, once the heart of Roman power, is now a collection of desperate men clinging to power in a dying world. By 235, the empire is no longer a single state, but a chaos of competing rulers, each claiming the title of emperor. The old order is gone, and the future is uncertain. And so, the empire, once the mightiest of the world, is now a shadow of itself, a relic of power, lost in a century of war, betrayal, and ruin. Imagine the world falling apart, like a toy you can't fix. Empires break, cities burn, and people lose everything they know. No one is in charge. Kings fight each other, and the people suffer because no one is listening to them. People are hungry, cold, and scared. They look for safety, but there's nothing left to hold on to. The world is broken, and no one knows how to put it back together. It's like the pieces are too big, and the hands are too small. The empire stood at the edge of the known world, its borders fraying like old tapestry. Rome, once the heart of civilization, now stretched thin, its reach outmatched by the forces that sought to tear it apart. The legions, once the unshakable force of Roman might, now found themselves outnumbered and outmaneuvered. Their discipline had weakened, their numbers dwindling as the empire's wealth grew more uneven. The provinces, once loyal, now turned against Rome in rebellion, or sought their own rulers. The empire had grown too vast, too slow to govern, and the cracks in its foundation had begun to show. Internal strife had already begun to consume the empire. Civil wars, power struggles, and the collapse of the imperial system had set the stage for a deeper, more violent unraveling. And yet, the empire still held on, like a patient in the final stages of a disease. Its people were aware of the decay, but they did not yet see the end, only the slow, inevitable descent into chaos. The empire's fractures were not just political, but economic. A shattered coin in your hand is a symbol of the crumbling value of Roman currency, a promise broken by emperors and greed. As the state failed to provide even basic services, the people turned to desperate measures. A merchant, stripped of his goods, watches his store burn in the streets, his hands trembling with helplessness. Cities, once the beating heart of the empire, now lay in silence. A child walks through the empty streets of a once thriving metropolis where the echoes of the past are all that remain. In the face of such collapse, some sought to hold on, others to rise. A man, his face lined with years of struggle, gazes at the horizon, where the future is uncertain and the past is gone. The clever twist came not from strength, but from the desperate need to survive. The empire fractured into competing kingdoms, each claiming legitimacy through bloodlines and divine right. Each new ruler declared themselves emperor, flooding the world with names and titles that meant nothing in the face of chaos. It was a war of legitimacy, not of arms. The people, once proud of their emperor, now saw emperors as tools of the powerful. Some were killed, some fled, and others were simply ignored. Their authority a farce. In this age of confusion, even the gods seemed to abandon Rome. The sky wept with rain, the earth cracked, and the once mighty empire stood on the edge of collapse. The clever twist was not in the war, but in the illusion of order. It was a game of pretense, where power was claimed not by conquest, but by claiming to be the one who had the right to rule. And so the empire, once unbreakable, was broken not by an enemy, but by its own weakness. It was a lesson in power, in the illusion of control, and in the cost of losing faith in the divine. Beneath the chaos, the earth itself seemed to groan. The soil, once fertile, now bore the scars of war and neglect. Crops withered in fields left untended, and the rivers, once life-giving, carried the remnants of famine. The climate shifted like the tides of a war-torn sea. Droughts followed by floods, and the once predictable seasons became erratic, as if the heavens themselves had turned against the people. In the ruins of cities and the quiet of the countryside, the natural world whispered its own lament. It did not speak in words, but in the silence between the crumbling stones and the absence of life. The earth was not just a victim of the crisis. It was a witness, bearing the weight of human suffering, and in its silence, it carried the memory of everything that was lost. Imagine a house that's been broken into, and instead of a thief, you have 100 different people, each claiming to be the rightful owner. They all try to fix it, but no one agrees on how. Each person has their own idea of how the house should be restored, but none of them can agree. They all think they know better, and none of them care if the house is already ruined. The house isn't just broken. It's being rebuilt by people who don't even recognize the original design. Some try to restore it, others tear it down, and most just leave it to rot. It's not just that the house is in disrepair. It's that no one is in charge. Everyone thinks they are, and no one is. The result is not collapse, but stagnation, a slow death in slow motion. This is not a metaphor for a single failure. It's a metaphor for a civilization that has lost its direction, its purpose, and its unity. And in the end, it all falls apart. Comment this emoji if you made it to the end. In the year 391, the Roman Empire stood on the precipice of transformation. A new faith was rising, and an old one was being cast into the shadows. Theodosius, the last pagan emperor, had declared Christianity the state religion, a decision that would forever change the course of history. With a single stroke of the pen, he sanctioned the destruction of temples, the burning of sacred texts, and the erasure of 1,000 years of tradition. The silence that followed was not of peace, but of mourning. A mourning for a world that had once been unified by belief, now split by the weight of faith. This was not just the end of paganism. It was the beginning of something else. Something that would shape the future of Europe for centuries to come. So what exactly are we talking about? It's not just about the end of an ancient religion. It's about the moment when a single empire's official faith became the dividing line between its people. Paganism, once the lifeblood of Rome, was not just a set of beliefs. It was the language of the gods, the rhythm of festivals, the heartbeat of a civilization. Then came Theodosius, a ruler who saw faith not as a choice, but as a weapon. He didn't just outlaw pagan practices. He erased them from the very foundation of Roman life. The fall of paganism wasn't a sudden event. It was a slow, deliberate act of erasure, starting with laws, then with violence, and finally with the silence of the temples. This was not just the end of a religion. It was the beginning of a new world, one where belief became a matter of identity, and faith could divide as easily as it could unite. This isn't just a story about ancient emperors and temples. It's a story about how one decision can ripple through centuries, shaping the way we think, live, and believe. When Theodosius banned pagan practices, he didn't just end an era, he set a precedent. Every time a society has faced a similar choice, it has echoed this moment in some way. You may not have lived through the fall of Rome, but you've seen the consequences. The way we treat belief, conflict, and identity today is still shaped by the choices made in the shadow of emperors and temples. Religion is not just about faith. It's about power, control, and the right to define what is acceptable in a shared society. Theodosius knew this, and so do we. When we ignore the past, we risk repeating its mistakes. Theodosius's decision may have ended an ancient faith, But it also opened the door to new struggles that still define our world. Theodosius rose to power in the late 300s, a time when Rome was a patchwork of faiths, where temples still stood and emperors walked among gods. He was not just a ruler, but a zealot, a man who saw the old gods as enemies of the true faith, and the temples as fortresses of darkness. By 391, his final decree sealed the fate of paganism in the Roman Empire. No more temples, no more offerings, only silence and ashes. The old gods, once the heart of civilization, were cast into the shadows, and the new faith, now the law of the land, would shape the future of the world. The fall of paganism was not just the end of a religion, but the end of an era, a moment when the world was remade, and its people were forever changed. Imagine a world where gods are not just stories, but real forces shaping your life. People prayed to them, built temples for them, and even fought wars for them. One ruler, named Theodosius, decided that these gods were wrong. He believed only one true god should be worshipped, and he made it the law. The old gods lost their temples, their priests, and their followers. Over time, the stories of these gods faded, and they were forgotten. Religion became a powerful force that divided people. It was not just about belief, but about who was right and who was wrong. In the year 380 AD, the Roman Empire stood at a crossroads. Theodorus, the emperor who would later be known as Theodosius, was a man of conviction, shaped by the echoes of his father's faith and the weight of history. The empire was vast, yet divided by belief. In the east, the Nicene Creed had taken root, while the west still clung to the traditions of the old gods. Theodosius saw this division as a threat to unity, and he made it his mission to mend it. He had the support of the bishops, who saw in him a powerful ally against the rising tide of paganism. But he also understood that force alone would not suffice. He needed to shape the hearts and minds of his people. The first step was to declare Christianity the state religion. This was not just a political move, but a declaration of the empire's soul. It was a step toward unity, but also one that would set the stage for conflict. With this declaration, Theodosius set into motion a transformation that would reshape the spiritual and cultural fabric of the empire. He was not merely changing laws, he was redefining the future of Rome. The mechanism began with the Edict of Thessalonica, issued in 380 AD. It declared Nicene Christianity as the state religion, binding the empire's institutions to a singular faith. This was not merely a declaration, but a legal and spiritual mandate. Every citizen was now expected to conform, or face consequences. Pagan festivals were outlawed, and their symbols were defaced, their traditions suppressed under the weight of imperial decree. The mechanism was not just about control. It was about erasing the past, rewriting history, and embedding faith into the very fabric of daily life. It was a slow, deliberate process, one that would take centuries to fully dismantle the ancient world's spiritual traditions. The clever twist lay in the idea that the state itself was now a religious institution, not a neutral arbiter. The emperor became the supreme priest, and the empire became a temple of the new faith. By aligning the state with Christianity, Theodosius ensured that the faith would not just survive, but thrive. It was no longer a matter of persuasion, it was a matter of allegiance. Theodosius didn't just ban paganism. He erased its presence from the public sphere. He made it impossible to practice openly, ensuring that the faith would be confined to the margins, to the private and the persecuted. The empire was now a unified body, bound by a single creed. Yet, in this unity, there was division. Between the faithful and the infidel, between those who clung to the old ways and those who had no choice but to submit. This was not mere policy. It was a transformation of identity, of culture, of history. The empire had chosen a path, and with it, the world would change forever. Beneath the grandeur of emperors and the fervor of faith, there was an unspoken truth. The world was changing. The cosmos was no longer just a canvas for gods, but a realm governed by laws, measured and understood. The stars, once interpreted as divine messages, now whispered secrets to those who dared to listen. The night sky was no longer a mystery, but a puzzle waiting to be solved, one that no god had claimed to master. In the quiet of monasteries and the hush of temples, the old ways faltered. The world was not just being reshaped by emperors and faiths, but by the very act of observation, a quiet revolution that no god had ever taught, but that humanity was now learning to live by. The science of the world was not a rebellion, but a revelation. A slow, silent shift in how people understood their place in the universe. And in that understanding, the old gods found themselves quietly, irreversibly outpaced. Imagine a city built on the bones of its own past. Temples that once sang with devotion now echo with the silence of abandonment. This is the fate of Rome's temples after Theodosius. They stand, but their purpose is lost, their meaning eroded by time and decree. Theodosius did not burn these temples, but he declared them unfit for worship. The last embers of paganism flickered in the margins, out of sight, out of reach. The gods, once revered, now watched from the shadows of history. The decline of paganism was not a victory, but a loss of continuity, of shared belief, of a common language of worship. Theodosius may have won the battle, but he could not save the soul of the old world. In the end, the gods of Rome did not vanish. They were simply displaced, buried beneath the weight of new faiths and the inevitability of time. Theodosius did not end paganism. He forced it into the quiet corners of memory. This is the tragedy of empire. To build a world of faith, and then to destroy it with the same hand that once gave it life. Theodosius left a legacy not of peace, but of division, and in that division, the old gods found their final resting place. Comment this emoji if you made it to the end. The final days of Rome were not marked by triumph, but by a slow, inevitable decay. The last Caesars, once symbols of power, now stood as relics of a fading empire, their thrones empty and their legacies in question. In the great halls of the Palatine, where emperors once ruled with absolute authority, silence now reigned. The echoes of their voices had long since faded, leaving only the sound of wind through empty corridors. The people of Rome, once proud and defiant, now watched in quiet despair as their city's grandeur crumbled. The streets, once teeming with life, now bore the weight of history's final sigh. The city that had once conquered the world now stood at the precipice of its own ruin. Its walls, once symbols of strength, now seemed to weep with the weight of centuries. And in the end, Rome did not fall with a cry, but with a breath. A final, unspoken farewell to an age of emperors and empire. We're talking about the end of an empire, not in a grand, heroic way, but in a slow, cruel decay. The final Caesars, men who once ruled the world, now lost their power, their purpose, and their dignity. The last Caesars were not warriors, not leaders of legions, but men caught in a web of betrayal, scandal, and political ruin. Their names are forgotten, their legacies reduced to whispers. Then came the sack of Rome, a moment of violence, fire, and looting that shattered the city's soul. It was not a battle, but a final, brutal reckoning with the collapse of a civilization. The Romans had ruled for centuries, but in the end, they were not conquerors of the world, but victims of their own hubris. The empire fell not with a sword, but with the slow erosion of everything that made it great. We are looking at the twilight of an empire, the end of an age, and the loss of something that no longer has a name. It is the silence that follows the fall of Rome. You might think this is a story of emperors and legacies, But it's really about the collapse of something you've never seen. A civilization that shaped the world, and the quiet moment it let go. It's not just about the fall of Rome, it's about the people who lived through it, who built and then watched it all crumble, and who had no one left to tell their stories. When Rome fell, it wasn't just a city that burned. It was a way of life, a dream, a language, and a culture that would take centuries to recover. You might not care about Rome, but you live in the world it built. The roads, the law, the ideas, the architecture, all of it is still here, still shaping you, even if you never knew it. So when you hear the word Rome, think not just of marble and emperors. Think of the people who lived, loved, and lost in the shadow of its greatness. The last of the Caesars fell not by the sword, but by the weight of time and folly. Augustus had built an empire, but his heirs had lost the vision to hold it together. Rome was no longer the heart of the world. It was a city of whispers, of broken promises, and of leaders who forgot how to rule. The legions, once the might of Rome, had turned their loyalty to coin and power, not to the state or the people they were meant to protect. The empire was a house built on sand, and when the last Caesars fell, Rome itself was left to the mercy of time in the hands of those who had waited too long. The sack of Rome was not an end, but a final collapse, a moment where the city, once the center of the world, became a symbol of what was lost. In the end, Rome was not taken by enemies, but by the weight of its own history, a history that had outlived its people, its rulers, and its dream. Imagine a world where emperors are more like ghosts, and Rome is just a memory. The last Caesars are old, weak, and surrounded by people who don't believe in their power anymore. The city they ruled has fallen apart, and no one is listening to them anymore. They try to act strong, but inside, they know the end is near. The people have moved on, and the empire is just a story now. One day, the walls of Rome fall, and the city is taken. It's not a battle, but a surrender. The last Caesars are captured, and their empire is no more. The world moves on, but Rome is gone. In the end, the last Caesars are not remembered as rulers, but as symbols of a time that was lost. Their names are whispered, their stories are told, and their empire is buried under history. Even though Rome is gone, its story lives on. The last Caesars may be forgotten, but their legacy is still felt in the world they once ruled. It's a sad ending, but a powerful one. The Western Roman Empire, once a beacon of power and culture, now stands on the brink of collapse. The last Caesars, weak and divided, are left to navigate a world that no longer recognizes their authority. The Imperial court is no longer a place of unity, but of intrigue and betrayal. Emperors rise and fall in a cycle of power struggles, their legacies fading with each passing year. The Senate, once a symbol of Roman tradition, has become a hollow shell, its members more concerned with self-preservation than the survival of the empire. The legions, once the lifeblood of Rome's might, are scattered, disbanded, or corrupted. Their loyalty is no longer to the empire, but to generals and personal gain. As the last Caesars struggle to maintain order, the seeds of Rome's downfall are already sown. The empire is not just losing its power, but its very soul. The mechanism begins with the siege engines, these monstrous contraptions of war, their iron claws reaching for the city's walls. They are built for destruction, yet their creators remain silent, lost in the weight of their own ambition. Each ram, each ballista, is a tool of calculated despair, designed to bring the city to its knees. They are not mere weapons, but instruments of a slow, agonizing collapse, as if Rome itself is being broken down piece by piece. The walls, once proud and unyielding, now groan under the relentless pressure. The cracks spread like veins, and with each strike, the city's lifeblood leaks away, its soul slowly being out. The mechanism is not just of stone and steel, but of will and endurance. The Romans fight, but their resistance is a fading echo, a final whisper against the storm of history. And so, the city begins to fall, not with a single blow, but with the steady, inexorable weight of time and inevitability. The mechanism is in motion, and Rome, once unshakable, is now a target. The clever twist came not from the sword, but from the pen. The emperors, desperate to preserve their legacy, turned to propaganda, rewriting history to make them seem more noble, more divine than they ever were. They claimed Rome had always been a beacon of virtue, that its fall was a divine punishment for the sins of the people, not the failures of its rulers. They painted themselves as martyrs, not villains. But the truth was buried beneath layers of lies. The people knew the emperors were corrupt, weak, and out of touch. They knew the empire was dying, not because of divine will, but because of its own decay. The clever twist was not in the words they wrote, but in the silence that followed. The world listened, not because they believed the stories, but because they knew the truth was too painful to speak. In the end, the emperors tried to write their way out of history. But history, like Rome itself, was too strong to be erased. It waited, patient, for the right moment to be remembered. Beneath the chaos of empires, science hummed in the bones of Rome, a quiet pulse of knowledge, lost in the din of war. The Romans, once masters of engineering, now watched their aqueducts crack and their roads crumble beneath the weight of their own history. Even the stars, which had guided their armies and their emperors, could not predict the fall of a city built on glory. In the quiet moments, between the screams and the smoke, the science of Rome lingered, not in triumph, but in the weight of what was left. The science of Rome was not just in its machines, but in the minds that built them, now buried under the dust of history. Imagine a great tree, its roots deep in the earth, its branches stretching toward the sky. But now, the branches are dying, the leaves falling, and the heart of the tree is rotting from within. The tree is still standing, but it's no longer the same. It's been weakened by years of neglect, by storms that it could no longer weather, by the weight of its own legacy. It's not the tree's fault. It was once strong, once vibrant, but time and the passing of its children and the weight of history have left it hollow. We look at it now, and we see only the shell of what was once great. But in its decay, there is still a story worth remembering, not of glory, but of endurance and the slow, inevitable fall. Comment this emoji if you made it to the end. The stones of Rome are not just remnants of an empire. They are the bones of a civilization that shaped the world we live in today. Beneath the surface of history, we find the roots of our language, laws, and ideas, all entwined in the legacy of a city that once ruled the world. This isn't just a story of conquest. It's a story of ideas that outlived emperors and outlasted time. We walk through the echoes of a civilization that once stretched across continents, and now we carry its weight in every word, every law, and every thought. Let's explore how an empire built in stone became the blueprint for the world we live in today. So, what exactly are we talking about? Rome wasn't just a city. It was an empire that spanned 3 continents, stretching from the British Isles to the edges of Egypt. It was a civilization that redefined power, law, and order in ways that still echo today. We're looking at a system that created the first known legal code, standardized weights and measures, and laid the foundation for the modern concept of citizenship. It wasn't just about conquest. It was about organization. This was a civilization that built roads that connected distant provinces, created a common language, and spread ideas that would shape the future of governance and culture across the globe. But behind its grandeur lay a system of control, a vast bureaucracy, and a military that reshaped the world. It was a complex, often brutal machine that left an indelible mark on history. So when we talk about Rome's legacy, we're not just talking about marble and monuments. We're talking about the blueprint for modern states, the roots of democracy, and the echoes of empire in today's world. You might not think about ancient Rome, but every time you sign a contract, you're using a legal system born from Roman law. Their ideas about justice, ownership, and governance are still in your daily life. The Latin language lives on in countless words you use, like government or justice, words that define how you understand the world. It's not just words, it's a framework for thinking. The Roman concept of citizenship isn't just a historical term. It's the foundation for modern democracy. The idea that every person has a role in the governance of their society is a legacy we take for granted. You don't have to be a history buff to feel the weight of this legacy. Every law, every word, every structure you encounter is a whisper from the past, shaping the world you live in. So yes, you should secretly care about this. Because the world you know is built on the shoulders of an empire that shaped everything we take for granted. In the year 509 BCE, the Romans cast off their Etruscan kings and founded a republic built on ideals of civic duty and collective power. The Senate, the people, and the army formed a fragile balance of authority, shaping the very fabric of governance for centuries to come. The Punic Wars brought Rome to the shores of Carthage, a clash of empires that forged Rome's military might and cemented its control over the Mediterranean. With Hannibal's elephants and Scipio's victories, Rome expanded its reach and its ambitions. The empire's reach stretched from the Scottish Highlands to the Sahara, from the Danube to the Tigris. Roads, aqueducts, and law codes spread Roman influence, creating a shared cultural and legal framework that would outlive the empire itself. As the empire grew, so did its fractures. Civil wars, economic strain, and the rise of barbarian kingdoms signaled the end of an era. The last emperor fell in 476 CE, but his legacy was already etched into the world he left behind. The fall of Rome did not end its influence. Its language, law, and institutions became the foundation of modern Europe. The echoes of its power still shape the way we govern, think, and live today. Imagine a big city, full of people, all speaking the same language, sharing the same laws, and even using the same coins. That city is Rome, and it taught the world how to be together. Rome didn't just build roads and buildings. It built a way for people to live far apart but still feel connected. That's how the world started to become one place. Rome's legacy is not just in what it built, but in how it showed people that even when something big ends, its ideas can live on forever. So when you look at your world today, remember that Rome didn't just shape the past. It helped shape the future. And that's a legacy worth remembering. At the heart of Rome's empire was a system built on order and control. From the Tiber River to the furthest provinces, a network of roads and legions connected the vast expanse of the known world. The Senate and the Emperor were the twin pillars of governance. While the Senate debated laws, the Emperor wielded power through military might and divine favor, ensuring stability across the empire. The legal code of Rome, known as the Corpus Juris Civilis, became the foundation of modern law. It introduced the idea that justice should be written, fair, and accessible to all citizens. The empire's strength was not just in its armies, but in its ability to assimilate cultures, languages, and ideas. This fusion created a shared identity that would outlive the empire itself. Every city, every road, every law was a step in building a world that would one day stretch far beyond the borders of Rome. It was a foundation, a framework for what was to come. At the heart of Rome's machine was a system of law that shaped every citizen's life. The 12 Tables, written in the 5th century BCE, were the first codified laws of a free people, establishing order and justice in a city that would one day rule the world. These laws weren't just rules, They were the foundation of a republic where power was shared and where the people had a voice. It was a radical idea. Governance not by kings, but by the will of the people, as expressed through their representatives. This system of governance became the blueprint for future republics, from the United States to France. It was a mechanism of balance, where power was checked, and where citizens were both the rulers and the ruled. But Rome's strength lay not just in its laws, but in its infrastructure. Roads, aqueducts, and bridges connected the empire, making it possible to govern vast territories and move goods, ideas, and people across thousands of miles. These physical networks were more than engineering marvels. They were the veins of a civilization, carrying the blood of Rome through time and space, ensuring that its influence would never be contained within a single city or state. The clever twist lies in the way Rome transformed conquest into civilization. It didn't just take land, it wove new systems into the old, turning enemies into citizens. By granting citizenship to conquered peoples, Rome created a shared identity that outlived empires. It was not just power, it was a promise of belonging. This strategy allowed Rome to expand without the burden of total assimilation. It built a civilization that was both vast and unified, a model for the future. It wasn't just about control, it was about creating a framework where many voices could coexist under one system, an idea that would echo through history. This twist, this act of turning conquest into inclusion, was Rome's most enduring and subtle innovation, shaping the blueprint for nations yet to be born. Beneath the marble and the myths, Rome's true legacy is in the science it passed on. From aqueducts to roads, its engineering was not just practical, it was visionary. Roman engineers didn't just build, they measured, calculated, and adapted. Their knowledge of geometry and hydraulics was ahead of its time, and it outlived the empire itself. The Romans' mastery of concrete, a material they invented, allowed them to build structures that stood for centuries. It's a material still used today, quietly holding up our modern world. Their understanding of law and governance, though rooted in politics, was built on a foundation of logic and order, principles that still shape our legal and administrative systems today. In the quiet hum of Rome's science, we find the roots of our modern world. It wasn't just buildings and borders. They built the very framework of what we know today. Imagine a single stone, worn smooth by centuries of time, yet still holding the weight of an entire civilization. That stone is Rome, and the world it built is the foundation beneath our feet, unseen but unshakable. It is not the grandeur of its buildings or the might of its legions that define Rome's legacy, but the quiet, persistent imprint it left on every corner of the world, like a shadow that never fades. This machine is still running today. You hear it in the way we speak, in the laws we follow, in the roads we travel. Rome is the invisible hand that guides the modern world. So, in the end, Rome is not just a relic of the past. It is a living, breathing structure. Its bones in our own, its voice in our own, its purpose in our own. And that, perhaps, is the truest legacy of Rome. Not in its triumphs or its conquests, but in its silence, its endurance, and the way it shaped the world without ever claiming to do so. Comment this emoji if you made it to the end. You stand in the shadow of the Colosseum, where emperors once ruled and crowds once cheered. The stones beneath your feet whisper of glory, of power, of the weight of history pressing down through centuries. It's not the grandeur that haunts you, but the silence. No roar of crowds, no echo of the gladiators, just the quiet hum of the city, as if it's holding its breath, waiting for something to break. This is where the empire fell. Not in a single moment, but in a slow unraveling, a quiet decay that no one saw coming until it was too late. We look at Rome today not just as a relic of the past, but as a warning, a mirror held up to our own world, asking what we might be building in its place. What happens when a civilization becomes too comfortable with its own power? When it forgets the cost of its dominance? That's the question we're about to explore. When we talk about the fall of Rome, we're not just talking about a city, but an entire civilization. It was a place where emperors ruled, philosophers debated, and millions lived under a vast and complex system. It was the heart of a world that shaped the future. But Rome wasn't just a city, it was an empire. It stretched from the Iberian Peninsula to the Middle East, from Britain to North Africa. It was a machine of military might, economic power, and cultural influence, all bound together by a single name. The fall of Rome wasn't a sudden collapse. It was a slow unraveling, a series of fractures that grew deeper over time. Corruption, over-reliance on foreign troops, economic strain, and internal decay all played a role. Today, when we look at Rome's fall, we see a warning. It's not just about a city or an empire, but about the fragility of power, the cost of excess, and the consequences of losing touch with the people who sustain you. So what exactly are we talking about? We're talking about a civilization that once stood at the center of the world, and how it came undone. And we're talking about how its story still echoes in our own time. You think this is just about ancient history, but the truth is, the fall of Rome isn't a story from the past. It's a mirror held up to the present. When we ignore the warning signs, we risk repeating the same mistakes. We build without foresight, grow without restraint, and forget the price of our ambitions. We all have a role in this. Whether you're a leader, a citizen, or a dreamer, you're part of the story. You carry the weight of the past in your choices today. The fall of Rome is not a tale of failure, but of warning. It's a call to reflect, to question, and to act before it's too late. You should secretly care, because the world you live in is built on the lessons of the past. And if you ignore them, you may be the next chapter in a story you didn't write. In 49 BC, Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon, and with it, the fragile balance of the Republic. His defiance of the Senate marked the beginning of a new era, one where power would no longer be shared, but seized. The Republic's collapse was not sudden, but a slow erosion of its core values. Corruption, factionalism, and the unchecked ambition of leaders like Pompey and Caesar eroded the very principles that had once held Rome together. Augustus rose from the ashes of civil war, not as a liberator, but as a master of manipulation. He rebranded Rome's chaos into an orderly empire, while secretly tightening his grip on power. For centuries, Rome thrived on its ability to absorb and adapt. It conquered new peoples, not just through force, but through the integration of their cultures, languages, and religions into its vast, ever-expanding identity. But even empires, no matter how mighty, are vulnerable. When the internal cohesion of Rome began to fray, the empire became a patchwork of competing interests, each vying for control over the remnants of a once unified world. The fall of Rome was not the end of civilization, but a reminder that even the greatest powers are not immune to decline. Its story is a mirror, reflecting the fragility of all human systems, and the weight of what is lost when they fall. An empire isn't just buildings and emperors. It's people, stories, and choices that keep it alive. But even the strongest empires can fade if they forget who they are. When an empire stops listening to its people, it starts to lose its soul. It forgets the reason it was built in the first place. The fall of Rome wasn't a sudden crash. It was a slow, quiet goodbye, like a story that ends not with a scream, but a sigh. Today's world is different, but the same truths still apply. We must remember, greatness isn't just about power, it's about people. History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. And if we don't listen, we might be writing the next chapter without realizing it. The first step in the unraveling of Rome was the foundation itself, a vast, interconnected system built on conquest, trade, and military might. It was not just a city, but an empire, a machine of order and control. At its height, Rome was a marvel of engineering and governance. Its roads, aqueducts, and legal systems created a framework for stability and growth, but also for dependency. Rome's strength was in its ability to integrate new regions into its structure. But integration required a degree of control that, over time, became harder to sustain. The empire's structure was a delicate balance of centralized power and local administration. As demands grew, so did the strain on its foundations, a strain that would eventually crack the system from within. This first step was not just about the empire itself, but about the people who sustained it. They believed in the system, but as it expanded, so did the gap between rulers and the ruled. The first step was the collapse of the internal structures, but the second step was the slow erosion of the system itself. The machinery of governance, once efficient, became sluggish, its gears misaligned by greed and incompetence. Bureaucracy grew fat on patronage, and laws were twisted into tools of control rather than justice. The once robust institutions of the state became hollow, their purpose lost in the maze of self-interest. The people, once the foundation of the empire, were now left to fend for themselves. The state no longer provided for them, and in its absence, trust eroded and the population turned inward, lost in uncertainty. The mechanism of the empire was no longer a force of unity, but of division. The ruling class saw the people as a problem to be managed, not a people to be served. And so, the very foundation of the state began to crack from within. The empire's fate was not sealed by a single blow, but by the accumulation of decay within its own system. It was not the people who brought it down, but the failure of the system to serve them, and in doing so, to serve itself. The clever twist came when the empire's leaders began to see their own decline not as a warning, but as a challenge, a test of their ability to adapt, to innovate, to outthink the chaos that surrounded them. They believed that if they could outmaneuver their enemies, if they could reshape their institutions with the right policies, they could delay the inevitable for another generation, another decade, another century. But in their hubris, they overlooked the most dangerous enemy of all: themselves. The empire had become so vast, so complex, that it no longer functioned as a single entity, but as a collection of competing interests, each vying for power and survival. The clever twist was not in their strategy, but in their failure to see that the empire was no longer a machine to be fixed. It had become a system in decay, and no amount of cleverness could reverse the tide. In the end, the clever twist was a trap, a distraction from the deeper truth, that no empire, no matter how strong, can escape the weight of its own legacy if it refuses to confront the reality of its decline. Beneath the marvel and the grandeur, there was a science to the decline. Of climate, of soil, of water. Rome didn't fall because of emperors or wars, but because the earth itself stopped feeding it. The aqueducts, once the lifeblood of the city, could not defy the law of entropy. Water, like power, flows from high to low, and Rome had long since reached its lowest. The soil had been stripped of its nutrients, not by the hands of men, but by the weight of 1,000 years of agriculture. Nature, in its patience, had said enough. Even the stars, in their silent ancient wisdom, had whispered warnings. The climate had shifted, the seasons had grown erratic, and Rome, like all civilizations, had been unprepared for the quiet collapse. The science of collapse is not in the fall of walls, but in the slow unraveling of the world beneath them. We too are building on a foundation that is not infinite. We often mistake complexity for strength, but the fall of Rome shows that no system is immune to entropy. A civilization can be built on grandeur, yet collapse under the weight of its own inertia. The empire's decline wasn't a single moment, but a slow, almost imperceptible unraveling. Like a thread pulled from a tapestry, the cracks spread until the whole fabric falls apart. Today, we see the same patterns: overreach, complacency, and the failure to adapt. Rome's legacy is not in its triumphs, but in its warning that no empire, no matter how mighty, is eternal. In the end, Rome's story is a mirror. It shows us that even the most powerful can be undone by the very systems they created. The lesson isn't in the glory, but in the humility of knowing we are all temporary. Comment this emoji if you made it to the end.